皆さん、はじめまして、デビッドと申します。本題に入る前に言っておきたいことがあります。It doesn't matter what your background is or what your capabilities are. You can learn Japanese. You can learn a foreign language. Now, based on who you are and how you personally learn, that method might be different than other people, and it might be slower than the people around you. But that's okay. The most important thing about learning a language and learning in general is a willingness to learn. I want to preface this video by saying that you shouldn't attack or harass any of the people or videos that I mentioned in this video. Please do not do that. それじゃあ、本題に入りましょう。So, I've been seeing a lot of these types of videos pop up recently. Japanese is easy. Japanese is simple. Learning Japanese is easy. Fluent in Japanese fast. Japanese isn't hard, etc. And to the people who make these kinds of videos, I'd like to say, もうこんな感じの動画作るのをやめてくれる? So, I want to use this video to do a few things. First, I would like to argue that Japanese is not as easy as these videos are purporting it to be. Next, I want to correct some of the incorrect information in some of these videos. And lastly, I want to make the case that some of these videos might actually be potentially causing harm and making Japanese learning worse for new learners. Now, that's not to say that the people who made these videos are malicious or that these videos are completely without merit or good information, but you should always take them with a grain of salt. Sometimes sensational videos are an attempt to sell you books, courses, or try to link you to a website where they get referral or affiliate earnings if you sign up. In fact, you should take literally anything you see or hear on the internet with a grain of salt. To start, there are three main issues that I have with these types of videos. 1. These videos tend to focus on certain aspects of the language and either ignore or downplay other aspects. 2. They don't provide proof that they are well-versed in Japanese or their information regarding Japanese is provably incorrect. And 3. They don't take into account the fact that there are different types of learners or take into consideration that people may have different capabilities. Alright, let's start off with this video from TheLingOtter. Japanese is easy actually, and then we'll take a look at their other video in which I think they kind of prove the opposite. TheLingOtter starts off the video by saying that Japanese is easy, and then goes on to tell us about the fact that Japanese is put into the 5th and most difficult language category, which states that Japanese takes about 88 weeks or 2,200 hours. And I'd argue that you probably need more than this. TheLingOtter then goes on to comment about this metric, time. They seem to imply that this isn't a good metric for determining difficulty because various parts of Japanese itself are easy to learn. Now, an argument could be made that just because something takes longer, it doesn't inherently mean it's more difficult, and that's an argument I could potentially get behind, but I'd argue that time is, more often than not, a good indicator of difficulty, especially since time is finite and so is human willpower. TheLingOtter mentions a bunch of different aspects of Japanese throughout the video, such as phonology, morphology, and syntax, and they specifically mention things like verb conjugation and honorifics. Now, in a vacuum, these things by themselves might be relatively simple and are perhaps overcome without much difficulty. But think about this for a second. Patting your head? Easy. Rubbing your stomach? Also easy. Doing both at once? Not as easy, but still doable. Now add in jumping on one foot, sticking your tongue out, and reciting the American Pledge of Allegiance. Suddenly things require a lot more brain power and effort. And I'd argue that languages are kind of like this. Each part by itself may not be difficult, but when you try to communicate, you have to combine them all together. It isn't until towards the very end of the video that TheLingOtter really mentions kanji. Kanji is one of the most difficult parts and arguably the most difficult part of Japanese. The framing of this video seems to be, if you remove kanji and look at various aspects of the language one at a time, it's easy actually. Personally, I like TheLingOtter's problem-solving method of going through various parts of the language and breaking them down to show that they're maybe not quite as daunting as a person may have originally thought. The main issue that I have with this approach is that just because each part is easy on its own, that doesn't mean that the language is easy when it's all combined. TheLingOtter also seems to be focusing on spoken Japanese and only briefly mentions kanji. In regards to kanji, it's incredibly difficult but also incredibly important. If you ever want to play games in Japanese or read manga, or especially if you ever plan on living in Japan, you should at least know how to read kanji, and honestly, you'll need to write it for certain things as well. One thing that I noticed about this video is that TheLingOtter didn't mention things like pitch accent or dialects. Now, I'm not a huge proponent of studying pitch accent. I believe it's something that you should learn naturally via shadowing or immersing yourself and not by focus studying, but it's still important to realize that pitch accent exists and it is in fact a part of the language, and so are dialects. Now, interestingly, TheLingOtter went through all this trouble to say that Japanese is easy, but then seemingly completely contradicts themselves in this video. At about 14 seconds into the video, TheLingOtter says that the difficulty is based on how close a language is to your mother tongue. Then they go on to say that for a native English speaker, Spanish is much easier than Japanese because Japanese is completely different than English. And here's the thing. All these videos I've been seeing and you've been seeing saying that Japanese is easy, they're in English. The vast majority of their viewers are English speakers. So by that logic, in a video speaking English to English speakers, is it proper to say that Japanese is easy? Moving on, there are some parts of TheLingOtter's video that I would like to take a moment to correct. At 11 minutes and 36 seconds into the video, TheLingOtter says, "In fact, did you know that there are really only 2 irregular verbs in the entire language?" To which they're referring to suru and kuru. They then expand on this and say that there might actually be 4 irregular verbs if you include aru and iku. Yes, these are some of the most common irregular verbs that beginners tend to encounter, but they are definitely not the only irregular verbs. Des is also a verb that does not follow the rules of any other verbs, making it irregular. It's not like it becomes demashita or deshimashita. And there are some other irregular verbs, but they tend to be very niche or for more advanced learners. The next correction is at about 13 minutes and 20 seconds. TheLingOtter said that one of the conditionals in Japanese is eba, but it's actually just ba. For example, taberu becomes tabereba. Now, verbs that happen to end with u will turn into eba, such as in the case of kau becoming kaeba and tatakau becoming tatakaeba, but the grammar point is just ba and not eba. Also, while ba is used for some hypotheticals, they tend to be more vague, such as yasukereba kaimasu. If it's cheap, I'll buy it. Full-on hypotheticals, complete hypotheticals, real hypotheticals, I'm not actually sure what they're called in linguistics, but these are expressed with toshitara. For example, inu ni nareru toshitara, donna inu ni naritai? If you could hypothetically become a dog, what kind of dog would you want to become? The final correction is more along the lines of advice. To my ears, TheLingOtter's T sounds, like to, sound a bit more like do. And also be careful with the pronunciation of R's.
Add the ra to the end.
Because here it sounds like the R's are being rolled, which in Japanese is not a good thing. It can make you sound like a delinquent or yakuza. The next video is Jozen's Learning Japanese is Easy. Here's how. Also, is it Jozen? Or maybe Jozen? I apologize if I'm mispronouncing it. In this video, Jozen says that learning Japanese is easy, but in one of his more recent videos, he says that he's been learning Japanese for about 10 years. Now, in my mind, learning something for 10 years indicates a level of difficulty and does not suggest that something is easy. Now, that's not to say that he isn't fluent or that it took him 10 years to become fluent in Japanese, but it does indicate that Japanese takes a long time to learn. In regards to his Learning Japanese is Easy video, he doesn't seem to provide reasoning as to why learning Japanese is easy or why his methods of learning make Japanese learning easier. He suggests using Heisigs. Okay, as an aside, why does everybody seem to pronounce it as Heisig? I'm like 99% sure it's a German last name and thus should be pronounced something like Heisig or Heisig or something like that. Anyway. He suggests using Heisigs, remembering the kanji book, as well as using Anki. But what about vocabulary? What about grammar? What about pronunciation? Now, to me, it seems like he's framing the video to say that Japanese as a whole is easy, or rather that learning Japanese as a whole is easy, but then he just focuses on one part of the language, and if we're going to argue one way or another, we need to look at the language as a whole. At about 1 minute and 35 seconds into the video, Jozen mentions how they used Rosetta Stone. My advice would be to stay far, 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 far away from Rosetta Stone. I'm glad that it made Japanese a bit more interesting for Jozen, and I 100% agree that you should make language learning interesting to help keep your motivation going, but Rosetta Stone is just known for not being a good resource for learning Japanese. Interestingly, I personally tried it when I was just starting out learning Japanese. At least in my case, it didn't teach the necessary building blocks for Japanese. I've also read that it's more based on teaching Spanish and similar languages to English speakers, so languages that are completely different, like Japanese, aren't exactly implemented well. At about 3 minutes and 30 seconds into the video, Jozen goes on to talk about consistency with your Japanese learning. And I think that this is a very important point, and everyone should make sure to be consistent without burning themselves out, of course. He also mentions how he took classes in university and that the classes were incredibly helpful, but also that the classes were incredibly slow. As someone who also took classes in university, I completely understand this feeling. You really have to go above and beyond what is being taught in the classroom if you're going to make any headway in your language learning. All in all, I think Jozen has some decent bits of advice in here, but overall it doesn't suggest to me that learning Japanese is easy. The fact that he's been learning for 10 years and the fact that kanji was pretty much the only focus in this video doesn't suggest to me that Japanese or Japanese learning is easy. The third video is Japanese is Simple from NicolaSan. In the video, NicolaSan talks about the same book that Jozen mentioned, Remembering the Kanji. Again, I find it kind of frustrating that people who are saying that Japanese is easy or Japanese is simple are seemingly only focusing on one aspect of the language. Either they downplay or throw out the writing system, or that is seemingly their only focus. At about 5 minutes and 56 seconds into the video, NicolaSan mentions that you can be learning 5 to 10 new kanji per day as a means of steady progress. Now, I personally like the idea of steady progress, and I think it's important for language learning, but there's one main issue that I don't think he mentioned: review. In psychology, there is a term called retroactive inhibition. It's when you forget something you previously learned when you learn something new. In the case of Japanese, to prevent this, you need to be constantly reviewing the kanji that you've previously learned. This means that on top of your 5 to 10 new kanji per day, you'll need to review the kanji that you've learned up to that point. Now, this doesn't mean that you have to review every single kanji every single day, but you'll need to set up a plan to make sure that you are properly reviewing and, better yet, actively using those kanji to keep them fresh in your mind. This means that your daily study is going to get longer and longer as you learn more kanji. Now, moving on to some corrections, and this isn't related to the concepts in the video, but I'd still like to correct them all the same. 1. At about 2 minutes and 8 seconds into the video, NicolaSan pronounces onyomi as anyomi. Now, this is just an assumption, so I might be incorrect, but I'm assuming that he potentially looked at the word in English, or rather written in English characters or Roman characters, and saw the letters on and thought they were pronounced like the English word on. And 2. NicolaSan keeps calling them kanjis, but I think it's just kanji. For some reason, it reminds me when people call it romanji, like Jumanji, instead of romaji, or at least romaji. Overall, I appreciate that NicolaSan is sharing information about a Japanese resource, remembering the kanji, and I think the point about steady progress that he mentioned is important, but I feel like ignoring the rest of the language and just focusing on kanji isn't making Japanese simple. The last video I want to take a look at is Trenton's Japanese is Easy Actually. Okay, so Trenton, level with me here. This is clickbait, right? Okay, so I'll straight up preface this by saying that Trenton's video is not bad by any stretch of the imagination, and I agree with him on a number of things and disagree with him on others, but overall I think he is bringing useful information to the table. Also, for what it's worth, it seems that the title and the thumbnail are more there for clickbait reasons because YouTube, because algorithm. In reality, I think Trenton might actually agree with me, and I believe what he's saying actually helps my case. At about 3 minutes and 36 seconds into the video, Trenton specifically talks about language YouTubers and how they're lying to you. Now, unless you're some kind of language learning genius, there's no way you're going to be learning Japanese as a native English speaker to fluency in a week or in a month or honestly even a year. The only exception being if you have no job or school and you devote every waking moment to learning Japanese. Then I could see someone potentially becoming fluent after a year, and I'd argue that it is conversationally fluent. But in reality, people have jobs, people have to go to school, people have other interests and hobbies and responsibilities that also take up their time. And, not for nothing, cramming a bunch of new information into your brain in a short period of time has what is called diminishing returns. And most importantly, willpower is a finite resource. These language YouTubers are potentially wealthy and do not have to work, or they are learning languages as part of their job being learning languages for their YouTube channel. And there's also the fact that they need to make these provocative and sensational videos for you to click on. What? This guy learned Spanish in 24 hours? And don't even get me started on fake polyglot YouTubers. Oh wow, you can say hello, my name is blank and how are you in 12 different languages. Okay, cool, so you spent like 2 afternoons memorizing a whole bunch of sentences? Sorry, you're not a polyglot. Anyway, all in all, I think Trenton does a good job highlighting the idea that Japanese requires a lot of work, but it's 100% an attainable goal. Now, I mentioned earlier in the video that these types of videos might be making Japanese learning worse for new learners. So what do I mean by that? First, it's important to note that some people are much better at learning languages than others. Their brains are just kind of wired that way. And personally, I feel like a lot of the people who post these kinds of videos and language learning YouTubers in general might just have brains that are more wired for learning languages. In contrast, there are a lot of people whose brains just aren't quite as good at learning languages. We all have our strengths and weaknesses, and I'd argue that using blanket statements like X language is easy to learn can be incredibly demoralizing for those types of people. Those people might attempt to learn Japanese because they were told it's easy, and then when it becomes difficult for them, they might think that they're stupid or slow or not good enough to learn Japanese. Well, all these people are saying it's easy, so what's wrong with me? Maybe I'm just not good enough to learn Japanese. People learn things at different rates and have their own strengths and weaknesses when it comes to studying and learning. People with ADHD, for example, may have difficulty spending longer periods of time studying Japanese due to the possibility of not being able to focus. Now, I won't sit here and mention every single potential obstacle, but just realize that even if Japanese takes longer for you or is more difficult for you than it is for other people, you're not a failure or a bad student. It's also worth mentioning that people learn better in different ways. There are many different types of learners, such as auditory learners and visual learners, or there are people like me that need structure in order to learn properly. I studied Japanese for 4 years in university, and I'm incredibly glad that I did. I personally needed the structure that a class and my teachers were able to give me. Alternatively, there might be people who don't excel in a classroom environment. As I mentioned in the beginning, these videos aren't always 100% without merit. If someone looks at one of these videos and it gives them the motivation to learn Japanese, I think that's a good thing. The issues I have with these kinds of videos are that they're overly sensational or provocative, they often don't have supporting information or the information that they provided is incorrect, and some of them don't seemingly understand the intricacies of learning in general. I would hate for a person to watch one of these videos and think that Japanese is easy and then eventually stop learning it because after realizing it's difficult, they think they aren't good enough or smart enough to learn it. If we're going to be making videos about Japanese learning, let's just show a bunch of potentially useful methods of study and how you can make Japanese more easily attainable. Good luck with your language learning, whether it be Japanese or otherwise. There are now countless tools to help you, and I 100% believe that everyone has the capacity and capabilities to learn another language. はい、皆さん、一緒に頑張りましょう。 Whew, hey, so we're nearing the end of the video here, and if you made it this far, thank you so much for sticking around and watching. I put a lot of time and effort into this video. I even rewrote and re-recorded a bunch of things. So if you enjoy this type of content and would like to see more, please give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment down below letting me know your feelings about these kinds of videos, Japanese learning in general, and if you feel the same way as I do, or even if you don't. Again, please do not go out and harass the people I've mentioned in this video. Just please be sure to take what these videos say with a grain of salt and realize that language learning and life aren't so black and white.